So picture this. You've been studying English for, I don't know, years.
Right, doing the hard work.
Exactly. I mean, your grammar is just absolutely flawless on paper. You have this massive tower of flashcards perfectly memorized, and you just aced your written exam.
You're feeling pretty invincible at that point,
Yeah,
right?
totally invincible. But then you step off a plane in New York or London. You walk up to this tired barista in a super loud coffee shop, and they ask you what seems like a simple question.
And you just completely freeze.
Literally freeze. The sounds hitting your ears, I mean, they do not resemble anything you studied. You catch maybe like one word in 10.
Yeah, the line behind you is getting impatient.
And you suddenly feel like you don't speak a single word of this language.
It is, well, it's a universally terrifying experience for language learners. I mean, we've all been there.
Oh, for sure.
It's that exact moment when the sort of, sterile, controlled environment of the classroom just entirely shatters.
Right? It shatters against the messy, high-speed reality of a native speaker who is, honestly, just trying to get through their day. And that really is our mission for today. We are taking a deep dive into the invisible mechanics of how we actually process and, ultimately master a second language.
We're looking at that massive leap, right? The leap from reading a textbook to actually surviving a real-world conversation.
Exactly. And to help us build a map out of all that confusion, we're pulling from a pretty amazing stack of sources today.
Yeah, we really are. What do we have on the table?
So we've got a Cambridge English Teacher's Guide and then two highly revealing academic studies. One is out of Vietnam, focusing on this technique called narrow listening.
Oh, that one is fascinating.
It really is. And the other is from Northern Arizona University, and that one is all about metacognition.
Which is a big word, but we will definitely break it down.
We will. We also have a guide on a vocal practice called shadowing, and to top it all off, a cultural breakdown on the absolute minefield that is American sarcasm.
Yeah, when you look at all these sources together, they really stop treating language as just like a list of rules to memorize.
Right.
And they start treating it as this deeply physical, psychological, and even cultural phenomenon.
I love that. So I want to start by figuring out why that coffee shop scenario is just so overwhelming.
Okay, yeah.
Let's dig into that.
I mean, to do that, it seems like we need to crack open the brain's hardware, right? Like, look at how we actually decode sound in real time.
We do. And the Cambridge Framework for Developing Listening Skills, specifically for those C1 advanced exams, it gives us the perfect vocabulary for this.
So nice. What do they call it?
Well, they highlight a really fundamental distinction between how we listen. They break it down into bottom-up processing and top-down processing.
Okay, so bottom-up implies, like, starting at the foundation. So we're talking about the raw auditory data here.
Exactly. That is the hardware doing the heavy lifting. I mean, bottom-up processing is basically the act of decoding.
So just breaking down the sounds. Right, you hear individual sound vibrations, phones, basically. And your brain identifies them, pieces them together into syllables, then into words.
And then it strings those words into phrases and sentences.
You got it. You are quite literally building the meaning from the smallest possible unit upward.
It's kind of like looking at a pile of loose bricks.
Right.
And you're slowly mortaring them together, brick by brick, until you eventually realize, oh, hey, I've built a wall.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Like, if a receptionist tells you their office is at number 60, your bottom-up processing is what actually captures that S sound.
Right, and the specific stress pattern, too, I'm guessing.
Exactly, so you don't accidentally walk into building number 16. It is just literal mechanical recognition.
But, I mean, if we only listen that way, conversations would take forever.
Oh, we'd be painfully slow.
Right. We'd constantly be lagging behind the speaker while our brains played catch up with the bricks.
We would be entirely lost in any environment that wasn't, perfectly silent. Because bottom-up processing is really slow and incredibly fragile.
Fragile how?
Well, think about it. If a truck drives by or the speaker just mumbles a little bit, a brick goes missing.
And the whole wall just collapses.
Exactly. And that is exactly why our brains rely so heavily on the other system top-down processing.
Okay, so what is the top-down part bringing to the table?
This is where you bring your outside resources in. Stuff like context, the potext of the conversation so far, and just your general knowledge of how the world works.
Okay. And the Cambridge Guide actually uses an example that perfectly isolates how this top-down processing bails us outright.
They do, and I love this example because it happens so instantaneously. They call it the spring versus string scenario.
Right, the fashion show example.
Yes, so imagine you're watching this fast-paced television show about fashion. The host is speaking rapidly, maybe the audio mix is even a bit muddy.
Which happens all the time on TV.
Exactly. And you clearly hear them rattle off what sounds like the phrase spring, summer, autumn, and winter.
Okay, so if I am purely relying on my bottom-up processing, my brain tells me, well, I heard the S and the ing. The word is string.
Right. The bricks have successfully built a valid English word.
But the architect overseeing the construction immediately steps in.
Yes. Your top-down processing looks at that and just says, that makes zero logical sense.
Because, first of all, the cotext. Summer, autumn, and winter are seasons. String is definitely not a season.
And second, your world knowledge comes in. We are watching a fashion show, and the fashion industry releases clothing collections categorically by season.
So before you are even consciously aware of it, your brain just overrides that raw auditory data.
It completely overrides it and corrects the word to spring.
It basically fills in the blank with a highly educated guess based on the context.
It does it so efficiently, in fact, that most native listeners will swear they actually heard the word spring perfectly clearly.
Even if the speaker genuinely misspoke and actually said string.
Exactly. The brain basically hallucinates the correct audio to make it fit the context.
That is wild. But I guess the issue for someone learning English is that their top-down processing is severely handicapped, isn't it?
It really is. If you are new to the language or even just new to the culture, you simply don't have that vast database of context to draw from.
So what happens? You default to survival mode.
You do. You rely almost entirely on that fragile bottom-up processing. You are desperately trying to catch every single phone just to survive the sentence.
And by relying entirely on that bottom-up decoder, the language learner runs face first into, well, the ultimate enemy of textbook English.
Ah, yes, here we go. Connected speech.
This is where it gets really interesting, because connected speech is the absolute destroyer of bottom-up processing.
It really is. It breaks all the rules you learned in the classroom.
I was reading through the source material from the Advanced English Communication channel,
Yeah.
and it completely reframes how native speakers actually sound.
Yeah, connected speech is basically the phenomenon where words physically change their phonetic shape depending on their environment.
Meaning, a word spoken in isolation almost never sounds the same when it is jammed into the middle of a really fast sentence.
Standalone pronunciation is basically a classroom fiction. I mean, the physical mechanics of the human mouth dictate that when we speak at a normal pace.
Things just kind of bleed together.
Exactly. The consonants and vowels of adjacent words just bleed into one another.
The source actually breaks this down into several specific mechanisms. Let's look at assimilation first.
Sure, assimilation is a great one. This is when a sound changes to be more like the sound right next to it.
Like the example they give with the phrase 10 bikes.
Right. If you say 10 and bikes separately, very slowly, the N in 10 is very clear. Your tongue touches the roof of your mouth just behind your teeth.
Right. 10.
But if you say it quickly, like 10 bikes, your mouth is already anticipating that B sound in bikes.
And the B sound requires your lips to be closed.
Exactly. So to save time, your mouth just closes early. 10 bikes becomes 10 bikes.
Yeah. An M sound completely replaces the N sound.
Yep. Now imagine you're an English learner heavily relying on bottom-up processing.
My brain is frantically searching its mental dictionary for the word Tim. And while I'm doing that, the speaker has already moved on to the next sentence.
And you're completely lost.
Yeah.
Then you also have elision, which is the complete deletion of a sound.
Like they just dropped the letter entirely.
Exactly. If a native speaker says next door, they rarely actually pronounce the T in next.
Next door. Yeah, I don't say the T at all.
Because your tongue physically cannot release the T and then form the D fast enough without making this clumsy little pause.
So it just becomes next door.
Right. And then we have linking, like how law and order becomes law and order.
The examples get even more extreme with common phrases, honestly. Like want to becomes wanna, would have becomes woulda.
Oh, and your favorite one from the notes?
Yes. Could you? In fluid American English, the D and the Y merge together into an entirely new sound.
It morphs into a single syllable.
It sounds identically to the letter Q. Like literally just the letter Q.
Q, hand me that pen.
It's crazy. If a learner is listening for the distinct dictionary pronunciation of could, they will never ever find it.
They are looking for a brick that simply isn't there anymore.
Or take what did you? that devolves into what'd you do yesterday.
How did you becomes hoja? How did you know about that?
It's a completely different language. And we also have to factor in the vital concept of weak forms, right?
Yes, both the Cambridge Guide and the Communication Channel emphasize this. English is heavily reliant on stress.
Meaning we only pronounce the important words clearly.
Basically, we only pronounce the nouns, verbs, and key adjectives clearly. The grammatical glue, the prepositions, conjunctions, and articles, they get deliberately weakened.
The vowels just collapse into that neutral, lazy sound.
Right, the schwa.
So the word as, which rhymes with has in isolation, completely loses its identity.
As cold as ice becomes cold as ice.
And the word for becomes fur. Like, I got this for you.
You know, this actually brings to mind a personal failure of mine from years ago.
Oh, do tell.
It was when I was first studying conversational French in Paris. I had perfectly memorized the vocabulary for ordering at a bakery. I knew all the words.
You had your flashcards ready.
Exactly. So I walked in, super confident, and the baker asked me a rapid-fire question. And my brain completely short-circuited.
Oh, no. Just total freeze.
I stood there staring blankly at him. I literally thought he had used some super advanced regional dialect.
Well, he hadn't.
Not at all. I later realized he was just asking a totally standard question, but the weak forms and the elisions had morphed 4 distinct words into one continuous blurry sound.
You were waiting to hear the individual words you'd studied.
And they just never arrive.
I always think about connected speech kind of like making a stew.
A stew. Okay, I like that.
Yeah. When you learn a language from a textbook, you are looking at all the raw individual ingredients separated on a cutting board.
Right, very organized.
There is your perfectly diced carrot, which is your vocabulary word. There is your potato, which is your grammar particle. You can see them clearly.
But then a native speaker opens their mouth.
Exactly. And they have taken all those ingredients and just thrown them straight into a blender.
It's all mashed together.
You can no longer pick out the individual carrots. You can't find the could or the you. You just have to recognize the flavor of the whole dish, the cue.
The stew analogy is incredibly apt. And, you know, we really have to recognize why native speakers blend their language like this.
It's not just to make learners miserable.
Believe it or not, no. It isn't a conspiracy to torture language learners. It is purely a matter of physical efficiency.
Because speaking clearly takes too much work.
Essentially, yes. The human jaw, the tongue, and the vocal cords, they want to expend the least amount of muscular effort possible.
Right. Gliding seamlessly between sounds, dropping difficult consonants, and rushing through weak vowels, it saves massive amounts of energy.
It does. But for the learner, that physical efficiency on the speaker's part requires a monumental cognitive effort to untangle.
Because their brain is burning up processing power trying to unblend the stew back into carrots and potatoes.
And by the time they finally realize what jaw means, what did you, the conversation is already over.
So the limitation here is pretty stark. You simply cannot solve a physical acoustic problem purely by reading more grammar rules.
No, you can't. Knowing the ingredients of the stew does not teach your ear to recognize the blended flavor.
Nor does it teach your mouth how to cook it.
Which means we need a physical intervention.
Right. If the bottom-up decoder is broken by connected speech, how do we train the body and the brain to handle the blender?
This brings us to a guide from the Oxford Language Club, focusing on a technique known as shadowing.
Shadowing. Now, this is a concept that often makes traditional, highly academic learners a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it?
It does, mostly because it feels almost deceptively rudimentary.
It sounds kind of like mimicking. Like the core instruction is basically listen to a piece of native audio and immediately copy the exact sounds you just heard.
Right, slightly behind the speaker, kind of like an echo.
It is essentially an advanced listen and repeat methodology.
It is, but when it's executed with structure, it addresses the exact physical deficits we just outlined.
The Oxford Language Club outlines a very specific 3-step protocol for this. So step 1, you find a native audio source.
Right, like a podcast, an audiobook, or a scene from a television show.
And you must have the transcript. You hit play, and you simply listen while reading along. You don't pause.
You definitely don't look up unknown words in a dictionary.
You are just letting the audio wash over you, right?
Yeah.
Just to establish the baseline rhythm and map the territory.
Exactly. Then step 2 is where the real work happens.
So you play the audio again, but this time you pause after a single sentence.
And you repeat it out loud.
But the goal isn't just to casually read the sentence, is it?
No, not at all. The goal is to become an absolute auditory clone of the speaker.
You mimic the exact intonation, the rising and falling pitch, the speed, and specifically, you mimic the connected speech.
Right. If they say whatcha, you say whatcha.
You repeat that single sentence 3 to 5 times before moving to the next one.
And step 3 is just committing to doing this regularly over time.
Okay, it is a rigorous process if done correctly. But I have to push back a little here.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I mimic a bird call perfectly, I might sound great, but I have absolutely no idea what the bird is actually communicating.
That's a fair point.
So isn't shadowing just mindless parroting? You are bypassing the intellect entirely to just echo sounds. How does behaving like a tape recorder build deep structural comprehension?
It is a really vital question, and I think it strikes at the heart of a major misconception in language education.
Which is?
The idea that language is solely a cognitive, intellectual exercise. It isn't. The Oxford Language Club highlights a mechanism that is very easily overlooked: muscle memory.
Muscle memory. So speaking a language is physical.
It is an intensely physical, almost athletic feat. Consider the physiology for a second.
Okay.
When you are exposed to a new language, you are encountering phonemes, sounds that simply do not exist in your native tongue.
So your facial muscles have never made those shapes.
Exactly. Your lips, your jaw, the specific placement of your tongue against your teeth or palate, they have never been required to move in those specific configurations.
Right. If you've spent 30 years only speaking Spanish, your mouth literally doesn't have the neurological wiring or the physical habit of forming the harsh English th sound.
Precisely. If you only ever read English or only do written grammar exercises, those physical muscles basically atrophy.
Ah, I see.
So shadowing forces the learner into the gym. By relentlessly repeating the audio, you are forcing your mouth to practice those microscopic muscular movements.
Until they become a physical reflex.
Exactly. And it isn't just about single sounds either. It goes back to the rhythm of the stew we talked about earlier.
Right, the stress-timed rhythm.
Yes. English, as we mentioned with weak forms, is a stress-time language. The rhythm is dictated by the stressed syllables occurring at relatively regular intervals.
Regardless of how many weak syllables are crammed between them.
Right. But many other languages, like French or Japanese, are syllable-timed, where every syllable receives roughly equal duration and weight.
And the source mentions katakana English in Japan to illustrate what happens when you ignore this physical rhythm, right?
It is a profound example, really. The Japanese language utilizes a syllabary system, and katakana is the specific script often used to adapt foreign loanwords.
Okay, so how does that affect the rhythm?
Well, the phonological structure of Japanese relies on moraic rhythm, essentially consonant-vowel pairs.
Right.
So when a Japanese learner encounters an English word packed with consonant clusters, like the word strike,
Their physical instinct is driven by their native language.
exactly. They instinctually insert weak vowels between the consonants to make it fit their native rhythm. So strike becomes sutaraku.
Wow. 5 syllables instead of 1.
They are reading the correct English vocabulary word, but they are playing it with the physical instruments and rhythm of Japanese.
And because the stress pattern and the vowel duration are completely altered, the word becomes largely incomprehensible to a native English ear.
Right. The intellectual knowledge of the word is totally useless because the physical delivery is miscalibrated.
So shadowing actively prevents that katakana English.
It does. By strictly mimicking the native audio, you aren't allowing your brain to translate the pronunciation through your native phonetic filter.
You are forcing your body to adopt the alien rhythm. You are literally physically training your tongue to produce connected speech.
And by training your mouth to physically produce a Q sound instead of could you,
You are simultaneously training your auditory cortex to recognize it when someone else says it.
exactly. The motor cortex and the auditory cortex are deeply intertwined. If your mouth knows how to cook the stew, your ear knows how to taste it.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So shadowing acts as the physical gym for the mouth and the ear. It solves the mechanical decoding problem. But that introduces a new limitation. You can have perfect pronunciation and perfect auditory recognition, but if your brain processes the meaning of those words too slowly, you still fall behind in a real conversation.
That is the next hurdle.
Right. So if shadowing is the physical gym, what is the cognitive gym for processing speed?
To increase cognitive processing speed, you actually have to temporarily restrict the menu of information the brain has to deal with.
Restrict the menu. Okay, this leads us right into one of the most compelling pieces of academic research in our stack today.
Yes, the Payside Journal study.
Right. It was conducted by researchers Tranthin Gakyen and Rob Waring, and they decided to rigorously test an approach known as narrow listening.
Narrow listening is a framework that was originally proposed by the linguist Stephen Krashen.
I've heard that name.
He's a huge figure in linguistics, but this method has existed in academic circles for decades, but it rarely makes its way into mainstream classroom instruction.
Because classrooms tend to favor a really broad, scattershot approach to vocabulary, right?
Exactly. They want to cover as many topics as possible.
Well, the methodology of this study might change how people view that. So the experiment took place in Vietnam, focusing on adult EFL English as a foreign language learners.
And these were intermediate students.
And we should contextualize this, right? Vietnamese is a tonal language, fundamentally different from the stress-time nature of English.
Yes. And these are adult learners, so they are likely fatigued, working jobs, and trying to master an auditory system completely alien to them.
Which makes them the perfect candidates to test cognitive load theories. So the researchers divided them into a control group and a treatment group.
And the control group followed the standard, universally accepted method of language instruction. They did textbook listening exercises.
Meaning they listened to a really diverse range of topics.
Right. One day it's an audio clip about booking a hotel. The next day it's about environmental science. The next day it's a job interview.
And crucially, after every listening session, they were given comprehension questions or a graded test.
Which creates a very high-pressure, high-variance environment.
But the treatment group experienced something completely different. For 3 solid months, they engaged in narrow listening.
Right. They were provided with 5 audio recordings bi-weekly, but the catch was that all the recordings for that specific week were centered on the exact same familiar topic.
So if the topic was technology, they listened to 5 different people talking about technology.
Exactly. If it was hobbies, 5 clips about hobbies.
And there were 0 tests, no comprehension questions, no grades whatsoever.
None. The instructions were simply to take the audio home and listen to it repeatedly, purely for pleasure and familiarization.
So one group is bouncing wildly from topic to topic under the threat of a test. The other group is obsessively marinating in a single topic at their own pace.
And the researchers gave both groups a 50-question listening test at the beginning of the study and another one at the end of the 3 months.
Both groups started at roughly the same baseline, right? Scoring around 17 out of 50.
They did. The post-test results, however, were not close at all.
Not even a little. The control group, the students doing the standard, very textbook exercises, they saw an average improvement of 7.4 points.
Which, to be fair, is measurable progress. It shows that traditional study does work to some degree.
Sure, but the narrow listening group absolutely blew them out of the water. Their scores skyrocketed by an average of 18.7 points.
It's a huge jump.
The top performer in the narrow listening group improved by an astonishing 24 points.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, every single participant in the narrow listening treatment group improved by at least 13 points, which is near the absolute maximum gain of anyone in the control group.
It is a massive statistical validation of Krashen's theories.
Really makes you rethink the textbook approach.
It does. And when you see a discrepancy that large in a controlled study, you really have to look at the psychological mechanics driving it.
What do the researchers point to?
They point to 2 distinct phenomena. The first is the lowering of the affective filter.
Right. Krashen talks a lot about the affective filter. It's essentially a metaphor for language anxiety, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. The theory suggests that when a learner is stressed, anxious, or fearful of making a mistake, say, because they know they are about to be tested on the audio, their brain triggers a stress response.
And that emotional state literally erects a cognitive block.
Exactly. The filter goes up, and it prevents comprehensible input from actually being processed and acquired by the language centers of the brain.
So the audio physically hits the ear, but the anxiety prevents it from taking root.
Right. In the standard classroom setup, the students are listening defensively. They are listening just to survive the upcoming quiz. That is a highly anxious state.
But the narrow listening group was at home. There were no tests. They could pause, rewind, and just listen. So the filter vanished.
The brain was relaxed enough to actually absorb the data. But the second mechanism is even more critical to our question of processing speed.
Okay, what is it?
It is the development of automaticity.
Automaticity. So because the treatment group was listening to 5 different recordings on the exact same topic, They were sort of trapped in the specific vocabulary ecosystem.
Exactly. If the topic was vacations, they kept hearing the words flight, hotel, booking, and itinerary over and over again, spoken by different voices in slightly different contexts.
They were getting massive, hyper-concentrated exposure to a very limited set of acoustic ingredients.
And when you hear the word itinerary 20 times in 3 days, your brain no longer has to utilize that slow, bottom-up processing to decode it.
You don't have to consciously think about it anymore.
No. The recognition becomes automatic, the neural pathway is paved and streamlined.
Which leads us to the absolute mind-bending conclusion of this study. Because, I mean, you might look at those results and say, well, obviously they scored higher. If you practice listening to audio about technology for 3 months, you're going to get really good at passing a test about technology.
Naturally.
Yeah.
But the researchers actually anticipated that critique.
They did. The final test deliberately included sections that covered completely unpracticed topics.
Topics that the narrow listening group had never encountered during their 3 months of obsessive, focused listening.
And the data showed that the narrow listening group significantly outperformed the control group on those unpracticed topics as well.
Which is the real crux of the issue. How does practicing a narrow set of vocabulary improve your ability to comprehend entirely unfamiliar vocabulary?
It totally reminds me of learning to drive a manual transmission car.
Oh, I like this. Walk me through that analogy.
So when you first sit behind the wheel of a stick shift, it is absolute sensory overload. Your brain is operating at maximum capacity.
Yeah. Stalling the car every 5 seconds.
Exactly. You are trying to modulate the clutch pedal with your left foot, ease onto the gas with your right, remember what gear the stick is in, and try not to stall, all while checking your mirrors.
Right.
If a passenger in the seat next to you starts telling you a story about their weekend, you literally have to tell them to shut up. You do not have the cognitive RAM available to process their words.
Your brain is 100% occupied with the mechanical basics of the car. It is a highly stressful, high-filter environment.
Exactly. But what happens after you drive that exact same route 100 times? The physical mechanics, the shifting, the clutch, they become automatic.
Your muscle memory takes over.
You don't even look at the gear shift anymore. And magically, because your brain is no longer actively managing the clutch, you suddenly have an abundance of freed up cognitive RAM.
So now you can listen to the passenger.
Now you can drive the car flawlessly while listening to a complex podcast or having a deep philosophical debate with your passenger.
That perfectly illustrates cognitive load theory in relation to language.
Right. The narrow listening group automated the basics. By recycling the same sounds and sentence structures endlessly, recognizing the core grammar and pronunciation of English became like shifting gears.
It required zero conscious thought.
So when the researchers hit them with a brand new, unpracticed topic on the test, their brains weren't panicking over the basic syntax. They had all this extra cognitive RAM available.
And they could use that RAM to focus entirely on higher-level comprehension.
They could use their top-down processing to make inferences, guess the meaning of new words from context, and just navigate the unknown topic.
While the control group, meanwhile, was still essentially staring at their feet, trying to figure out how the clutch works, while the unpracticed topic sped right past them.
By restricting the menu, narrow listening actually builds the cognitive capacity to handle the entire buffet.
It's brilliant, honestly.
It really is. So if shadowing is the physical gym, and narrow listening is the cognitive gym to build automaticity, there's still one piece of the puzzle missing.
Right, because both of those techniques are somewhat passive.
You repeat the audio. You listen to the audio. But what happens when we try to pull back the curtain and teach learners to actively, consciously manage what their brain is doing?
We are talking about adding a layer of metacognition.
Metacognition, which, at its simplest, is just thinking about your own thinking, right?
Yes. It is the executive control center of learning.
Which brings us to the study out of Northern Arizona University, authored by Valeria Bugorovich. Now, this study targeted a different demographic entirely, PIE Level 3 students.
The program in intensive English. Level 3 designates them as low intermediate learners.
And crucially, these students are learning English specifically for academic purposes.
Meaning they need to be able to sit in a university lecture hall and comprehend dense, complex information in real time.
So the stakes for their listening comprehension are incredibly high. They can't just nod and smile, they have to pass college courses.
Right. So the researchers set up a controlled study over 8 weeks. The comparison group received standard, high-quality listening instruction.
But the treatment group was explicitly taught metacognitive strategies. They weren't just taught English, they were actually taught how to listen to English.
And the instruction focused on 4 specific metacognitive pillars: planning, monitoring, problem-solving, and directed attention.
The teacher enforced this by running every listening exercise through a very rigid pedagogical stage model. They couldn't just hit play on the audio.
No, they had to start with a pre-listening stage.
And this is where the physiological aspect of metacognition is fascinating to me. Because pre-listening isn't just about reading the title of the audio track.
Not at all. The students are asked to actively predict the vocabulary they are about to hear based on the topic.
So if the topic is climate change, they brainstorm words like carbon, atmosphere, and temperature.
Exactly.
But what does that actually do in the brain? Is it really just a warm-up exercise?
It is far more than a warm-up. It is physically priming the neural pathways. By consciously recalling those words before the audio even begins, you are bringing that specific vocabulary out of deep storage and placing it right into your working memory.
You are actively constructing the top-down processing architecture ahead of time.
Yes. When the audio finally plays and the speaker mumbles the word atmosphere using connected speech, the brain recognizes it instantly because it was already looking for it.
That is brilliant. Okay, so after the pre-listen, they do a first listen to grasp the main idea, then a second listen to focus on specific details, actively monitoring their comprehension.
And if they get confused, they must utilize problem solving, like using context clues to guess a word rather than just freezing up.
Then a third, listen to verify. And finally, a reflection stage where they analyze what strategies worked and what didn't.
It is a highly regimented, active process. And to measure whether this metacognitive bootcamp actually worked, the researcher used 2 separate metrics.
First, a standard listening comprehension test to measure actual performance.
And second, the MALQ, that's the Metacognitive Awareness Listening Questionnaire.
The MALQ is a 21-item self-reporting tool. It basically asks the students to rate their own internal cognitive processes on a scale.
Things like, before I listen, I think of similar texts I have listened to, or when I guess the meaning of a word, I think back to everything else I have heard.
It measures their self-awareness. So they took both the comprehension test and the MALQ before the 8-week program and again after.
And this is where the data presents a truly fascinating paradox.
Let's look at the actual listening test first. The results were exactly what the researchers hoped for, right?
They were. The treatment group, the ones subjected to those rigorous metacognitive stages, saw their listening comprehension scores improve significantly more than the comparison group.
So the active management strategies definitively worked. They became measurably better at understanding academic English.
However,
when you look at the results of the MALQ, the questionnaire asking them if they were aware of using these strategies, the data just completely flatlines.
there was no statistically significant change between the pre-test and the post-test for the treatment group.
Despite undergoing 8 weeks of intensive training on how to think about their thinking, they did not report an increase in their own awareness of doing so.
Which seems entirely counterintuitive.
Right. If teaching the strategy clearly boosts their test scores, but the students themselves don't realize they are using the strategy, what's the point of the self-awareness? Does the metacognition even matter if they aren't conscious of it?
It is a really interesting puzzle, and it highlights the tricky nature of self-reported data in psychological studies. There are a few ways to interpret this contradiction.
Okay, well, let's hear the theories.
The first theory suggests that perhaps these intermediate learners simply lack the vocabulary or the introspective capacity to accurately describe their own cognitive processes.
Because it is incredibly difficult to monitor your brain's processing while simultaneously trying to understand a complex foreign language lecture.
The cognitive load is simply too high to spare any resources for self-reflection.
It's like asking a runner to accurately track their own heart rate while sprinting away from a bear. They are way too busy surviving to take notes.
Exactly. But the second theory is even more compelling, and it ties right back to our earlier discussion on narrow listening.
Oh, really? How so?
It suggests that the metacognitive strategies became internalized and subconscious extremely rapidly.
Oh, we are back in the driver's seat of the manual transmission car.
We are. Think about it. If you hand a questionnaire to someone who has been driving a stick shift for 5 years and ask them, on a scale of 1 to 5, how often do you consciously plan your clutch depression before approaching a red light?
They would probably answer 1 never. because they don't consciously think about it at all. It just happens.
Exactly. The behavior is present, they are flawlessly operating the clutch, but the conscious awareness of the behavior is entirely absent because it has crossed the threshold into automaticity.
And the NAU studies suggest the exact same thing happened to these students. The highly structured pedagogical stages forced them into better listening behaviors.
They primed their vocabulary, they monitored their confusion, and those behaviors drove their test scores up.
But the strategies integrated into their subconscious so smoothly that by week 8, they weren't actively registering them as strategies anymore. It was just how they listened.
That is a profound takeaway for anyone trying to learn a skill. Behavior trumps awareness.
You do not need to be a neuroscientist deeply aware of your own synaptic firing to reap the benefits of a good physical habit. The structure forces the outcome.
The physical act of following the metacognitive steps builds the mental muscle, regardless of whether you feel yourself flexing it.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and look at the hypothetical superlearner we have built today.
All right, let's see what we've got.
You have put in the hours. You shadowed native speakers until your jaw physically ached, so your physical muscle memory is locked in, and you can instantly process the blended stew of connected speech.
Check.
You spent months doing narrow listening, so your cognitive RAM is completely freed up and your basic vocabulary is automatic.
Double check.
You drilled metacognitive strategies, so your brain subconsciously primes itself for context before the speaker even opens their mouth.
Mechanically, cognitively, and strategically, you are flawless.
You hear the barista clearly. You decode the exact phonetic structure of their sentence. You know the dictionary definition of every single word they just said.
Yeah.
And yet, you could still be left completely humiliated, totally misunderstanding the entire interaction.
Because mechanical perfection is totally useless if you cannot decode the intention behind the mechanics.
There are different types. The All-Ears English host brilliantly categorized it into 2 distinct types, each serving a completely different social function.
First, there is collaborative sarcasm.
This is the bonding version. The example they use is perfect. Imagine you and a coworker step out of the office in the middle of August. The humidity is choking, the sun is blistering, it is undeniably miserable.
And your coworker turns to you and says, "Oh, it's like 1,000 degrees out, no big deal."
Let's look at the mechanics of that. The literal words state a scientific impossibility. It is not 1,000 degrees.
Your bottom-up processor decodes a lie.
But the intention is purely social glue. The speaker isn't trying to deceive you. They are using hyperbole to invite you into a shared experience of misery.
They want you to agree with the absurdity of the statement. And the delivery is key here. Collaborative sarcasm is usually accompanied by physical cues.
The speaker might be smiling, shaking their head, maybe rolling their eyes in an exaggerated manner.
And the tone of voice is usually very animated.
But then, the All-Ears English hosts detail the darker side of the coin. Passive-aggressive sarcasm.
This is the weaponized version.
This is when someone uses the structure of a sarcastic joke to deliver a genuinely rude, vengeful, or cutting insult, but they use the sarcasm as a shield to avoid accountability.
It creates an incredibly toxic dynamic. The speaker attacks you, but if you react defensively, they immediately retreat behind the defense of, "Wow, I was only joking, you are way too sensitive."
I actually fell victim to this exact scenario early in my career.
Oh, really? What happened?
I was presenting a project, and I made a minor mathematical error on a slide. A senior colleague looked at it and said, "Wow, brilliant attention to detail there."
Oh, ouch.
Right. But I was so focused on mechanically decoding his English because I was nervous that my brain just accepted the literal meaning.
You took it as a compliment.
I actually smiled and said thank you. The entire room went dead silent. I had completely missed the passive-aggressive sarcasm, and by thanking him for an insult, I looked incredibly foolish.
That is a painful but perfect illustration of the danger. The words themselves, brilliant attention to detail, are universally positive.
It's a linguistic Trojan horse.
That's exactly what it is.
Sarcasm approaches your brain's gates looking like a perfectly polite, structurally sound gift. Your bottom-up processing says, a compliment, let's bring it inside.
But hidden inside that wooden horse is a hostile payload of insult and mockery.
And detecting that hidden payload requires a massive override from your top-down processing.
Your real-world knowledge, knowing that you just made a mistake on a slide, has to violently clash with the literal words, brilliant attention.
Your brain has to realize, in a fraction of a second, that the literal meaning makes no contextual sense, and therefore the intended meaning must be the exact opposite.
But how do you differentiate between the fun, collaborative Trojan horse and the hostile, passive-aggressive one, especially if the words are exactly the same?
The All Ears English Guide provides a great example for this. Imagine you tell a roommate, hey, the landlord is giving us a discount this month. Rent is going to be $10 cheaper.
And your roommate replies, oh, wow, I can't believe it, 10 whole dollars.
If we only have the transcript of that audio, it is impossible to know the intention. We must rely on non-lexical data.
We have to look at visual cues and listen to the micro-variations in tone.
If the roommate says 10 whole dollars while laughing, smiling, and making eye contact, it's collaborative. You're both united in mocking the landlord's cheapness.
But if they use passive-aggressive sarcasm, the physical performance changes entirely. The source explicitly warns to listen for a deadpan, flat tone of voice.
There is no animated pitch variation. It sounds almost robotic or exhausted.
And the visual cues vanish. The hostile roommate might break eye contact, stare at their phone, or let out a sharp sigh before speaking. They don't smile.
If the face doesn't match the positive words, the words are a weapon.
It is the ultimate fusion of auditory, visual, and cultural listening. To survive that interaction, you aren't just translating English vocabulary anymore.
You are translating human psychology, body language, and cultural context in real time under immense pressure.
Which is incredibly daunting, honestly.
Yeah, but it's also kind of beautiful, isn't it? When you realize the sheer symphony of cognitive processes happening in your brain during a simple 10-second interaction in a coffee shop or a boardroom.
It demands an immense amount of respect for the processing power of the human mind.
It really does. So to wrap up this incredible journey we've been on today, we started in the messy, blurry reality of connected speech, where native speakers turn perfectly good textbook ingredients into an unrecognizable acoustic stew.
We realized that to decode that stew, we can't just read about it.
No, we have to build physical muscle memory through the grueling vocal gym of shadowing.
Training the mouth to train the ear.
Exactly. And from there, we looked at how to speed up the brain's internal processor. We saw how narrow listening, obsessively focusing on one topic to eliminate anxiety and build automaticity acts like learning to drive a stick shift, freeing up our cognitive RAM to handle unexpected conversations.
We saw how explicitly practicing metacognitive behaviors alters our performance, even if our self-awareness never quite catches up.
And finally, we confronted the reality that even if the mechanics are flawless, you must cultivate the cultural reflexes to spot a sarcastic Trojan horse based entirely on a flat tone of voice and a lack of eye contact.
It is a monumental undertaking.
It is. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We have established today that mastering a language is not an intellectual exercise you do on paper.
It requires literally rewiring the physical movements of your facial muscles.
It requires altering your subconscious processing speeds. It requires adopting entirely new cultural reflexes to understand humor, hostility, and social bonding.
It is a complete systemic overhaul of how you interact with the world.
So, if learning to listen deeply means altering your physical habits, and fundamentally shifting your cultural assumptions to match a new society, at what point do you stop simply translating a language in your head and start actually living it?
Does adopting the physical rhythm, the automaticity, and the sarcastic humor of a completely different language ultimately change your original personality?
Do you become a slightly different version of yourself when you speak it?
It is a profound question regarding the boundary between language and identity.
I invite you to ponder that the next time you put on your headphones, step out into the world and wade into the muddy, high-speed waters of a real-life conversation. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.